Hello everyone, and welcome to this ADL webinar. This is part 2 of a two-part series on ADL that we're putting on. My name is Michael Riley, and I'm with the TT Training and UX team in APAC. These webinars are being put on by the Training and UX team, so if you have any questions, we have our Teams distribution email on screen here. So it's training-ux@tradingtechnologies.com. So if you have any questions, related to ADL in this webinar or any other aspect of the platform, frankly, whether it's, just how to navigate the workspace or auto spreader or whatever it might be, feel free to send those questions to us and we will address them accordingly. If you are new to ADL, we would encourage you to start with the first webinar, which can be found at our website, tradingtechnologies.com. If we go there now, you will see that at the top we have trading infrastructure, data, markets, and resources. Under resources, we have a webinars section, and if we click on that, that is going to take us to this page here. And under previous webinars, the first entry currently is TT Live Trading with ADL. So that's going to be part 1 of this webinar today, and we're going to build on some of the logic and some of the principles that we discussed in that webinar. So we do encourage you to have a look there. Also, while we're on our website here, also under resources, there is a documentation section, and if we scroll down a little bit, we can see that there is an ADL section right in the middle. If we click on View Documentation, that is going to load our entire documentation for ADL. You'll see that there's a number of links here for blocks and so forth, as well as advanced concepts, intro to ADL, basic concepts, and so forth. So that's always a great resource to keep in mind as you are building out your logic and so forth. Also, just at a very high level, when you log into TT, you can go to trade.tt or you go to your TT desktop icon, and that's going to take you to a screen that's going to look like this. You would enter your email and password, and then in the browser it would take you to the workspace launch page, which would look similar to this. And in the upper left we have Trade, ADL, Backtest, and Monitor. If you select ADL, that is going to open in Canvas for you, ADL Canvas. And that will look like what we have here, which is the ADL Canvas. We did touch on the layout and some of the basic features of what we have here. Again, that was in the previous webinar. In this webinar, we're looking to cover some common pieces of logic that you're likely to encounter when building algos. This is going to include kind of reloading orders, building some loop logic in the algo, and in doing so, like I said, we'll be building off the exact algo, the OTA algo that we used in the previous webinar. And then we're also going to be talking about virtualization, integrating continuous messages with discrete messages. We'll get into the analytics block, value bucket block, and then OMA algos. We did kind of show OMA algos in the last session, but we didn't really get into it in the Canvas, so we'll touch on that as well. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with just some kind of basic logic. So what we're going to do is we're going to look to quote on the best bid with a fixed quantity of 5. So I'm going to set my quantity to 5. Price will be the best bid. Set that quantity to user defined, and then we will be using CL Jan24. Select an account here. And with just that little bit of logic, I'm able to click play, and you can see in this MD Trader in the background that we do have a working buy order at 77.76, and that will continue to work with that bid as time moves forward here. So I'm actually going to modify something here before we go. So again, we are playing that algo, and then as the order gets filled, once that is complete, the algo doesn't really do anything else here. So in that case, we just bought 5, and that is the end of the logic. So what if we wanted to continue to buy and increase the increment using the algo that we have purchased? So we do have the manual option. So if I select my number block, I can go down to the variables. Now I have changed the number block to a user-defined variable under the variables type on the right side. And if I go down to the variables here, I can see number not, and I can increase that to 10. And as I click apply, get rid of that. As I click apply, we can then see that the order is now quoting again, and it says D3 W2. So we have bought 3 already. And we are now working a 2 lot, and we have basically incremented the order from 5 to 10. So the reason we're noting this is that the order block knows what the quantity is that it's already quoted and purchased. All right, so in this case, it's just by going from 5 to 10, it knows to place another order for a 5 lot rather than the entire 10 lot. If we wanted to kind of loop this around, and say after we buy a certain quantity, we want to continue to buy. We could go to our math block, we could grab an add block here, and then we could say 5 lot plus, oops, that was correct. Let's get rid of that. I'll also grab a value accumulator block here. I'm going to attach that to my fills output, and for the formula, I'm going to go with hash fill quantity in this case, click save, and now if we just ran this independently, let's go ahead and connect this all the way through here. There we go. So we're going to accumulate the fills after they have come back from the exchange. We're then going to be adding that to our working quantity, and then that would then increase as the fills come back, and we would constantly be quoting into the market. So currently it's showing a 10. Let me get my variable back down to 5 here, apply, and play. Okay, so in our MD Trader now, we can see that it is currently working a 5 lot on that particular best bid. And I'm just going to drag this across to kind of speed it up here. But as soon as I get filled, you'll notice that I get another 5 lot that appears. So we can see in our value accumulator that we have already gotten that 5. That has been added to our initial quantity, and now our quantity that is feeding into our order block is now showing a 10. All right. So in this case, it's just a constant, always quote 5 kind of situation. Now that might be a bit aggressive. That's possibly not what we want to be doing in this case. So if we wanted to say we only want to quote 5 after the entire 5 has been done, we can do that as well. So I'm actually going to stretch this out a little bit here, and we're going to add a few blocks to the canvas and kind of start to build out this logic. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the equals block from our menu on the left, and we're going to set our total filled quantity equal to our quoting quantity. Okay. Delete that edge there. So now what we're doing is we're saying, is the total filled quantity equal to our number block, our initial quantity? Let's go ahead and label that, plus whatever other value we might have. So we're going to be looking to determine if that is true or false, and that would only happen after the entire initial order is filled. And from there, I'm going to add in a generator block. And the generator block will create a discrete message based on various modes that we have here. So it's going to default to every start, but if I hit the drop down, we can set it to an interval, a set time interval in milliseconds. We can set it to any Bool change. So if it goes from something goes from true to false or false to true, that would generate a new message. There's Bool true, which is what we're going to use in this case. So we will be saying if the full filled quantity is equal to our 5 lot, our initial quantity, then generate a message. Now the reason we're going to generate that message is because I'm also going to add an extractor block. I'm going to connect that to my generator block, and this value extractor block is going to then take a picture of our total filled quantity. I'm going to label this real quick, filled QTY. All right, and from the extractor, I'm going to go into the formulas. I'm going to use the at, and then I'm going to select that total filled quantity accumulator block, click save, and I'm going to connect that value to my add block in order to complete this loop. Okay? So from here, again, I'm going to play the algo. You can see the order is working in the market. I'm going to drag that across, and we see that it does reload another 5 lot, as we expect. And let's see if we can get a couple of partials here as well. We'll see if that comes through. However, if a partial does come through, we would see that in the total filled quantity, it could go to any other value, let's say 11, 12, 13, but until that hits 15, or an increment of 5, any increment of 5, those values would not be equal. And then once they are equal, we are generating that message. Extractor is taking a picture of the full filled quantity, and then we are incrementing, so 5 to 10 to 15, and so on. Now that is fairly constant, so as soon as that full 5 comes back, we are going in and we're adding another order. We could also set a delay on that. So just expand on some of the blocks that we have available to us. We do have the stopwatch block in this case. And what that will let us do is I'm going to add that to our generator block. And it's basically going to give us a little bit of a pause before passing on the discrete message. So it's a discrete message inbound and outbound. And under the formula, I could just say 1000, which would be 1 second. And from that, I will pass it on to the extractor block like this. So we're basically just setting a 1 second delay after that fill comes in. So I'm going to go ahead and reset, play the algo, and I'm going to drag the order across. As we get filled, you'll see that there's kind of a 1 second delay there before the snapshot is taken, and then we increment higher. All right, let's get some partial here. Hoping the market's going to be favorable to us here for the display. And you can kind of see that 1 second delay kick in there. Okay. Now, in a sense, we're basically making one order, which is comprised so far of a number of 5 lot slices. And every time the 5 is filled, we then submit the next one. So in a sense, this is similar to an iceberg order without, so far, it's without the total quantity capping out the functionality of this logic. So we can add more logic to this to say, what is our total quantity going to be? So if I add another number block here, I could say total quantity, and I'm going to go with 21 specifically because it does not divide into 5 equally. And let's say we need to do a total quantity of 21, and in order to, so basically as these fills are coming in, we need to stop or adjust when the 21 is reached. So there's a few ways to go about doing this, and we're going to go through both of them here. And the first is going to be kind of in a longhand sense. So I'm going to add a, look for less than equal, there we go. So I'm going to say that our, accumulating quantity here with our add block, I'm going to say if that value is less than or equal to 21, we need to use one value instead of another. Okay? So that doesn't quite finish that out, so I'm also going to grab our, there we go, our if-then block. And this, as one might imagine, is going to allow us to have some kind of true-false functionality and then determine with the then or else inputs which value we want to use. So in this case, I'm going to connect the less than or equal to value because we're already asking, is that total quoting value less than or equal to 21? And if it's true, then we want to have that continue to use that quoting value. If it's not true, we want to stop at 21 and not increment any higher. Okay? So this is going to be our new input quantity. Try and move some of this around here just to make it easier to visualize. So that's going to be our new input quantity as we start to increment and receive fills back, start to increment these quantities in. So I'm going to, first I'm going to flatten this position real quick. Now let's go ahead and start to quote. Now that quoting order is working on the best bid. Again, I'm going to start to drag these across, and we'll see some of these fills coming back. So now we have 10, we're going to have 15, and we're going to get this next 5 lot fill. And from here, we see everything is processing as normal. So we have 15 total filled. We are currently quoting 20. Our if-then statement is quoting that proper amount. And now we have just gotten a fill, and we have total quantity filled of 20. And now we have stopped incrementing up in 5s, and we have stopped at 21 because of our less than or equal to question, and then the if-then statement responding accordingly, and now populating that 21 value. Oops, I just reset that. Okay. All right. Now, in a sense, like I said, that's kind of a longhand way of going about, building out that logic. We could also use a math block that we have in our list here. So I'm going to drag the math block onto the canvas here. And if I click on the math block on the right side under the block properties, we do have the math functions that are available to us. So you see there's a long list of values here, all of which would be explained in our documentation I mentioned before. And I'm going to select the min value, and it's going to give me 2 inputs. So I'm going to go with the 5 and our 21 total quantity. From there, I'm going to feed that into our quantity input in our order block. I'm going to go ahead and hit play again and again, drag some of these orders across. And what this block is going to do, it's going to take those two inputs, and as those fills start to come in, it's going to take the lesser of the two. So as more fills come in, it's going to top us out at 21, because 21 will be the minimum value, which the market would just trade for us. But I'll drag this across again. And in that case, it does take the snapshot. It knows that we have the 20 lot fully filled. Our generator block and stopwatch block produces that snapshot, and then our new value of 25, the math block realizes 25 is too much. We're looking for the minimum value here, which is 21, and then we quote accordingly. So only in this case, one more contract, which we can see in our working quantity. So if we go back and we look at the OTA algo that we built out in the previous webinar, we can see, just as a quick walkthrough, we have the initial buy or sell that we built. It's going to be at a specific price, in this case, a quantity of 5. And then on the right side, we have the entire cover order logic, where we capture the fill price, we capture the filled quantity, and then we quote accordingly. Now, in this case, if we were to loop or reload our logic in this particular algo, we would do the same thing that we saw a moment ago. So we would still have our fills accumulating at the very end, and hashtag fill. So fill quantity, and then we would just be adding that to our initial logic. There we go. So we would connect that 5 to our value that is accumulating at the end of the logic. And that would give us that continuous loop. Now, obviously, we could add the generator and the stopwatch as well, and all that other logic. However, in this case, we would only need to reload the initial order because as those orders come back, this is all one-for-one logic. So whichever orders come back as filled, we then generate our cover logic on a one-for-one basis in this case. Now, moving on from this, we do want to talk about virtualization, which is very useful and allows us to replicate a piece of logic. And actually, this algo is a great place to start in order to build out an example here. So I'm actually going to just move some of these changes back. And in this case, we are going to change our quantity to 50. So as an example, if we take this logic and I go into the market here, try and flatten out a little bit, really accumulating. So if I were to play this particular algo with a 50 lot quantity, 50 lot is quite a bit in our crude oil example. So if I click the play button here, I can go into the MD Trader and I can see that we did get our fills, and we are currently quoting a 50 lot up at a price of $77.91. Now, if you look at the fills widget, you'll see, I don't know, is there seven lines of fills that came back. So it didn't come back as a 50 lot. It came back as a 4, 10, 11, 6, 10, 5, and 4. And then the prices were at 80, 81, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So in this case, it's not exactly correct that each order, each slice of the fill that comes back to us from the exchange was 5 ticks lower than 91. So what we would want to do is have individual cover orders going in for each slice that is coming back to us. In order to make those individual cover orders, what we can do is go back to our algo, and first we need to identify the logic that needs to get replicated. All right, so in this case, everything right here needs to be replicated every time a fill message comes back from the exchange. All right, so what I'm able to do is select those blocks, click, drag. They're all selected, they're all moving together. I can right click, select group, and that's going to give me my group block, which we mentioned in the previous webinar, just as kind of a housekeeping and keeping your canvas clean. But when it's in that group setup, we can actually right click, get that on the screen here. I can right click and I can select virtualize, and you'll notice the border changes to the dotted border. And this means that every time this block receives a discrete message, it will create a copy of the logic inside of that block. Okay? We'll demonstrate that here in just a moment. But if we double click on the group, we are able to still see, what that logic is and so forth. And then if we want to go back up to the top, we can click the top arrow or the up arrow in the upper left, or the home arrow, which will take us back to the home level of the canvas. Okay, so let's do the example here where, again, let's flatten out our position. There we go. And from here, we can go ahead and sweep the market again with our virtualized logic. And if I go ahead and hit play, so in that case, we've got filled at a number of different prices, and we can see that the fills came back as a 688444659, and we can see in our working orders column that the working quantity is showing working 688444659. So that lines up exactly, and in each case, the orders are at a price that are 5 ticks greater, which is what we were looking for. So in this case, the first order that came, or the first fill that came back was at 82, at a price of 82 cents, and our first order is now quoting at a price of 87, 88, 89, and so forth. Do we have a gap at 90? And yeah, actually we have a gap in our fills coming back from the exchange as well, so that lines up perfectly. Now, going back to the canvas in virtualization, there are a few rules regarding virtualization and how we can, what we can and cannot do here. So the first is you always need at least one discrete message coming in to generate that copy of that logic. So if you were to, for example, if you were to have a time and sales block and you needed that time and sales information to feed into the logic inside of your group block, you wouldn't really be able to connect this in. I mean, technically you could connect it in. However, you would constantly be generating a new virtualization every time that there's a trade and that message is received. So you can certainly add that inside of the block, but something to keep in mind. From the outside, I would point out you can right-click on this group block. Then you have the option to add input connectors and output connectors. So for the inputs, there's Boolean, numeric, instrument, discrete message. We already have one discrete message, but you could certainly have messages coming from two different pieces of logic and then utilizing that same group. So I'm going to actually add a couple of numerics. And let's say we want to know, have the bid and ask feeding into our virtualization for whatever the logic is that we might have in there. I can then connect these. So in this case, it's saying input not and input one. So input not is the ask. We want to label this so we can kind of clean it up. I had added those inputs, so input not and input one. And if I select not, I can say I can go as the ask and then the bid. And if I go back out, we can then say, or we can then see that the ask price is now flowing into that ask input and the bid as well. On the outside, as I mentioned, we do have add output connector and we have the discrete message. We already had one in place, so the grouping that I had actually had a line, a discrete message line that was not in the grouping. So we can see that that is flowing out, and I'm able to capture my fill quantities as they come back out of that virtualization. Also, jump blocks. I had this included in the group, but jump blocks are available when you group it and you virtualize it. The jump blocks can jump into the virtualization. However, they cannot jump out. As you can imagine, if you're making many copies of the same logic, you would have, a lot of additional jump blocks being created. So that is not going to be possible on the way back out of the virtualization. So any information coming out would have to be via a discrete message. Now, as you can also imagine, if you're, let's say you're putting in a 100,000 lot order, and therefore you're going to have a lot of fills coming back, or for whatever reason you're just generating a lot of virtualization copies in your block. That can obviously accumulate a lot of memory, maybe slow down your algo. So inside of the virtualization, you can right-click on the canvas, and there's kind of a hidden block here, so you can select Add Exit Block. And what that's going to do is give you a block that will then eliminate the copy of the virtualization. So discrete message in creates it, and in this case, this block can remove it for you. What we can do here is add a few blocks. So we'll get a sequencer block and a branch block. And what's going to happen here is we're going to remove this fills, and we're going to have that still first traverse out to the outbound. Sorry, the sequencer block is just going to line up the order, the sequence of which of where the messages go first. So the first one will still exit, so we'll still get our fill message out. And then at the end, we'll have a branch block, and we'll set some logic to determine when to pass the message onto the exit block and eliminate this bit of logic. So we want to be very careful not to, erase this logic before our full fill has come back. So what we can do is look at the branch block, go to the formula editor, and I can say at order 1 equals 0. Note the double equals based on our operators here, so it's not a single equals, it's a double equals. So we're saying if the working order quantity of order 1 block is equal to 0, then yes, then exit that message through the yes output, which then hits our exit block. So we're monitoring to make sure that the working order quantity is 0, so all the fills have been accomplished, and once that last fill message comes through, eliminate that logic. Moving on, we did want to talk about bridging between continuous messages and discrete messages. Every so often this comes up, and it can be kind of odd to make the connection at first. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to throw a few blocks on here, and in this case, we're going to use NK-Deck23 and set the count. And actually, before we do that, I'm going to go with the time and sales block. And imagine the question, we need to know the max and min of a particular period in time. So what we're going to need is our discrete min, discrete max. Okay. And within here, we can say hash trade price. Go. And hash trade price. Okay. So with just this little bit of setup, we're immediately defining the time and sales, and we're saying, send down all the messages. There we go. And show me the last traded price, in this case, $33,395. And then I need to store that max and that min during that period. Since this algo has started, it will then continue to track those prices. Now that is all very much discrete messages. All right, that's all that the time and sales will output. And in a sense, we are actually limited to that, to the messages that come out of there and what information is provided in those messages. So in this case, it's trade price, but we don't necessarily have, let's say, the best bid or the best ask. Okay. Now we can access that data, just not using the time and sales block, but that will be done using the field block. And so let's actually get rid of this, and then let's try and answer that question of if we need to know the best bid or the best ask, how could we go about doing that? And let's go ahead and label this bid. And then we'll capture this by using some discrete messages as well. So in order to do this, what we're going to do is we are going to add 4 blocks here. Extractor, generator, and we're also going to get an equals block and a not block. Now, just to walk through real quick, the equals block is going to look at the 2 values that are coming in, determine if they are equivalent. If they're not, it will output a false, as we see here. The not block will simply do the opposite of whatever is coming in. So currently we have a false coming into the block, and now we have a true coming out. Generator we've mentioned a few times. Again, it's got a mode, and in that dropdown we can see a number of different options that we can select. So it can send a discrete message based on any of these, whether it be something timed, depending if there's a bool change, a bool true, every start of the algo instance, and so forth. So in this case, we're going to go with bool true, and what that is going to do is every time that the not block is outputting a true, which means it's taking a false from here, that means that these are not aligned, and we need to update our extractor block. Okay? So I'm going to connect that generator to that extractor block. So every time it is not aligned, it will take a new snapshot and display the best bid from here, and then it will be realigned, so to speak. We'll also need to point that extractor block to the bid. So at bid, save, and play. There we go. So it starts out right from the beginning, and and it's generating those messages and will continue to do so based on any time that there is a change in that bid price. Now, going back a couple of steps, we were really looking to determine what is the minimum or the maximum in this, of the bid price before we're using the last traded price. But again, the bid price is only coming through that field block. So again, we will take our min and max. And as I connect these, we're going to be utilizing this same discrete message, and then we know that there's been a change, so we need our min block and our max block to also check the best bid. And this block will automatically determine whether it is the minimum value that it is ingesting. And so here we're going to go with bid again, and the same for the max. Okay, so every time that generator block creates that message, everything downstream on the discrete side will take action in this case. So in this case, they're all referencing the bid. So it would then know, what is the maximum min or max for the bid in this period of time. In this case, this is a very simple example, and it is just looking at what is the best bid during some period of time. But again, it's more about the ability to say, hey, has something changed in a continuous state? And do I need to capture any information using discrete blocks in order to make some further calculation further downstream? Next up, we're going to talk about the analytics block. Now, I'm going to clear some of this off here for a moment. And we need the analytics block. Okay, so the analytics block, the primary use of this is to pull chart information into the algo, including technical indicators and the previous bar. So you can see on the left side of the block, we need to define the instrument. We also need to define the interval and the index. Now, the interval is going to be the size of the bar. So in this case, we have a 1 going into the interval, and that means it's going to be looking at 1-minute bars as we analyze this information. The index is going to allow you to see previous bars. So currently we are indexed to 1, indicating that our lower outputs here, so open, close, high, low, those are all going to be for 1 bar back. All right, so current is going to be the upper half of the outputs, and the 1 bar back, or the index 1, is going to be the lower half. When we click on the actual analytics block, if we look at the right side, a couple things to point out. So first, we're going to have an interval type. Currently it's set to time. We also do have the option to use volume as well. We'll use time in this example. And then we do have the number of bars to store. So the bars to store is what's going to allow us to first store that data and then use that index to say, well, how many bars back am I actually looking to analyze and then output? There are some restrictions here, so this is going to become more complex in the sense that we can only have 5 analytics blocks per algo. It's a heavy request from the servers in the back end, so there is a limit to that. However, we are able to make an initial call, which is pretty considerable, which we'll get into in a moment here. Also, instrument blocks need to be directly connected to the analytics block. You cannot use a jump in that case. Now, the number of bars to store on the right side, there is also a limit here, so it's up to 250 bars. So if we set this to 250 bars, that'd be 250 1-minute bars that we are referencing. Without populating this value, you're only going to get NaN output. So if I just have nothing going on there, we're going to get nothing but NaN on the output. As I mentioned, we already have time and volume as the interval types, and the interval max is going to be 1,440 or 1440, and that's going to be 1 full day. And you can store up to 250 days with a 250-day max down here, the number of bars to store. The issue is, if you go back that far, your contract most likely won't have a whole lot of data as you go back. There is no continuation. We have continuation charts on the workspace, so you can go where it automatically rolls back. That is not available in the analytics block, so do be aware of that as well. Down at the bottom, well, we do have the exposed bar outputs here, which is going to determine what outputs we want to show or not show. Obviously, there's a couple here that are not going to be on by default. And then down at the bottom, we do have a number of technical indicators that are available. So if you were able to select Bollinger Bands, for example, we would have additional inputs so you could modify the period, the deviations up, the deviations down, that are going to be then outputted from that study's output. As I mentioned before, there is a limit of 5 blocks that we can put on the canvas. So what if you need to scan something going deeper into the past? So let's say we want to know the max and the min of the last, X bars. After bar complete, we want to do a scan. So we would have an output here once the current bar is complete. And then we're going to loop through all of these bars, analyze, and then capture that value. Okay? So I'm going to add our loop block here. And what the loop block does is when it receives a single discrete message, it is going to generate a fixed number. In this case, we're going to say 100. It's going to generate a fixed number of messages from the loop output. It's going to finish with a message out of the exit output. And the entire time, the index will increase as each message is generated. All right, so this will run from up to 100. This will actually send the message, and then this will send the final message. Okay, I am going to increase the storage of our bars here as well. We're also, when the algo starts, we are going to want to run this right from the get-go. So I'm going to also add a funnel block, add this, and again, a generator block, and we're going to have that set to every start. In this case, we're going to change the logic here a little bit. So we are going to run this when the algo is initially started with our generator block, and then at each bar complete, we're going to run this study again to say, for only the last 100 bars, what is the high and low, the min or the max. Okay. So going further down, as we just saw, we'll use the min, and we'll use a max. So we're going to connect this. So for each loop, when we look at each bar, we're going to say, what is the value coming from the analytics block, the high or the low? And then, is that the max or the min? So for our max, we're going to say at. Now we're going to see a long list of all of those outputs that the analytics block has. In this case, we are looking at, well, you can see we have a top and a top underscore I. Underscore is indicating that indexed value. So if we're looking for the max in this case, we will be looking for high underscore I. So we'll save that. We'll also be looking for the low underscore I. Okay. I'm going to need a couple of extractor blocks. What we're going to do here, connect these to the end. So once the 100 loops have completed, there will be a final message that comes out of the exit, and then we're going to take one snapshot at the end of this process, and we're then going to know our max and min. So we'll say max. We're going to reference discrete max, and then the discrete min. So these two, the min and the max blocks, those will actually analyze the 100 values that come in, and it will determine which one is the max and the min. And then for that moment, after the bar is complete and the 100 loops have occurred, we'll then take a snapshot of that max and that min block, and we will then know that value. All right, so this max block is referencing here, and this extractor is referencing the min block. All right. So from there, we'll then reset those values to make sure all old data is cleared out. And then these are ready for that next bar to complete and the new loop sequence to begin. It all happens instantaneously. So the max and the min are going to show us a NaN value. Actually, let's just remove that for a moment. Reset. We'll play this again. So in that case, when we play, On start, generator block is going to generate a message that is going to trigger our loop block, which will run 100 loops. And actually, in this case, we forgot some additional bits here. We still do need to increase our index here. So let's remove that. And I'm going to use that math block again that we mentioned previously. Now, we're going to use the math block to get the max value So what we're going to have here is we're going to use the max value. So at the beginning of this, the loop is going to output a 0. That is problematic for our index because we need at least a 1 for our index value and for the algo to compile. So therefore we use the max block to say, we need to use a 1 as a minimum, but we say the max, so 0 and 1, 1 is the maximum, so we output a 1 to start out. Now, as that loop does its 100 loops, that value here in the index output will increment higher, and that will increment and feed into our math block here, and therefore pass on into the analytics block that higher increment value. And now we should be able to play the algo, and in this case, we now see that the max and the min, 7814 and 7769, are the two high and low min and max values for the last 100 bars. Okay. Now these values would be stored in there, which is why at the end we do want to use the reset input like that. So in this case, after this is looked at, these two blocks have looked at the 100 highs and lows. The last message comes out of here. The max takes a quick snapshot, as well as this extractor block here, capturing the min. There we go. Capturing the min, and now we will have those values stored, and then we can, continue on with our logic and tie that into whatever decision-making process we may have in the algo. Next, we're going to look at the value bucket block. So I'm actually going to clear all of this off, and what the value bucket really is going to allow you to do is, in a sense, it will let you store information into your algo, and then you'll be able to then look them up later on, and it'll allow you to store multiple values as well. So in this case, we're looking at the block, and we have a few different inputs here. So we have the lookup, the store, the reset, the value, and the output on the right. So on the store input, we'll be receiving a discrete message, and that can have various pieces in it, and that's going to allow us to store values in this bucket. A reset, like many of the other blocks that we've seen, so like value extractor also has a reset. That's just going to clear out the information altogether. And then the lookup is going to allow us to signal to the value bucket block which value we are going to input and which value we want to then output. So the key value is actually what we should be saying there. So what is the key going in, and then what is the value? So what we'll be doing is kind of making a very small database in this block. So if we look at this text document, we could have a key value set up. In this case, our keys could be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And then let's say the price of whatever product we're looking at is 250, 251, 52, 54, 52, 53, 52. So if I were to look up using the key of 3, my value on the output would then be 252. If I change the key to 2, then the value output would be 251. All right, so it allows us to store this information and then call upon that information in the event that we need to do so. How do we go about doing this? What we're going to do is we'll start with, again, our instrument block, and then we'll use time and sales, and we'll connect this here, and we'll use an accumulator. And what we'll use for a key in this case, or our first column in this case, is going to just be the number of trades that are coming through from the time and sales block. So under the formula, I'm going to select edit, type 1, Save that. And now every order that comes from the time and sales block, that will increment my accumulator block up by 1. Okay? Now, on the value bucket block, as I click on that block, we have a few different modes on the right side, and we have a formula editor. So what we can do is we have, we can either accumulate values within our values in our value bucket block, or we can average them, or we can use the last value. In this case, we will use the last. And for the formulas, when we open this up, it's a little bit different than normal. So in the upper left, we will see store key and store value. Again, going back to our little text document here, our keys in this case are going to be that accumulator, and then our values could be price, for example. All right. So for store key, I'm going to do @ and I will select the value accumulator not. And for the store value, I will do the trade price. Okay, so with that set up, the first value that we are going to ingest into the value bucket is going to be a 1 coming out of the value accumulator. So the output would be a 1, and that will start our first storage in the bucket with a value of 1. So if we go ahead and hit play, we are now going to start to accumulate data into our bucket. And so far only 3 values, but what we're going to work towards is actually looking at, what is the high and low of the last 10 trades. And that will continue to build out. And from here, what we're going to want to do is, we're going to want to monitor, what it is that is the max and the min, and then call on our value bucket block using the lookup value to determine what are the output values that are generating the last 10 trades and that min-max range. All right, market's a little slow on this one, so we might actually do about 3 or 4 trades. But nevertheless, if we go and we're going to grab the min and the max again, we're going to use basically the same functionality that we used a moment ago, in that we're going to get the loop block out here. We'll say we'll only do 5 in this case. In this case, we're going to actually be referencing the value bucket. And let's get this going here. So value bucket, using the @ symbol. So when we reference that, what we'll actually be referencing is the output, the continuous output, in this case, the value output. So again, if we look up to what is the price that accompanies, that lines up with that key value. All right. On the extractor side, two of these, and these will do the reset again. Well, we'll hold off on the reset just so we can check a little bit later on. Just like we showed before, this will then reference the max and the min. Okay, we won't connect the reset quite yet. We do want to see what some of these values are that are coming out before we do so. Now, going back to our value bucket, we still do need to input the lookup value so that we have some kind of value on the way out. So in order to do this, we're going to reference a few things here. First, I'm going to the value accumulator output. I'm going to add a jump block, paste the destination. And since our first order is going to generate that value first, so a 1 will be coming out of here on the first order and then stored as 1, it means that there would be no 0 key. We would start with 1. So what we're going to do is we're going to reference our value accumulator number, the most recent number, plus 1. That, and then we are going to subtract current index coming out of our loop block. Now it's this whole amount here that is going to then play into our value bucket in order to say, what is the last trade, and output that value so that we can know what our min-max values are going to be. So as we play this one in particular, let's see if the market's moving here. It's a bit slow at the moment. Okay, there we go. So in this case, when the trade occurs, we are going to continue to increase the value accumulator. Seems like we already have our 5 trades, which is great. Now the value coming into the value bucket, we're currently showing a 1, so that is going to be, our first value. So 7806, and every time that order comes in, it will traverse the path from the bucket to the loop. It would then do its 5 loops, and then we would be capturing the max and the min. You can see that the output is outputting, so 7806 and 7803. And on the last message, again, from the loop block, that's going to traverse from the exit output. The max will reference the max discrete block, and the min will reference the discrete min block, and then capture that value. We'll connect these to the reset ports in just a moment. And as that goes on, see related. So in this case, as our loop index increases, we are looking at the total value, so 20 minus the 5, so the loop index amount. So we have a total of 20 trades that have occurred, and we're just looking for the last 5. So in this case, it's looping and now showing the 19th, and that's what's going to then output from that value output. So 7805. There we go. So now with that reset, this will ensure that we're only capturing those latest data points, which is what we certainly want to do, because we're really only looking for the last 5 trades and what the max and min was in that particular range. Last up, well, before we leave the value bucket, this is again one example where we're checking the high and low of the most recent trades. But again, there's lots of flexibility within that value bucket as to what information you can store, how you can store it. As I mentioned, the mode. You can accumulate values per key. You can average the values per key input. In this case, we're just using the last. But nevertheless, tons of flexibility. So anything that that you might need to store for a long period of time, this can certainly be an option that you can utilize. Now, the last topic that we want to touch on before we wrap up is going to be the OMA algos, or order management algos. And these are algos that can be applied to an existing order. So you're applying some kind of logic to an order that is already working in the market. So in the previous webinar, we did actually build out and apply some OMA logic. So in this case, it was OMA 5 ticks under bid. So we'll pull up that logic here just as a refresher. So to walk through this logic here, the real key piece here is going to be the existing order block. So it's that yellow block on the left side, which is the 3rd one in our blocks list. So what this block does is that it allows the system to know that this logic in this algo is waiting to be applied to an algo, and therefore it puts it in a certain list, which we'll get into in a moment, on the workspace so that you can in fact apply it. Now, once it has been applied to an existing order, that order detail packet will come down this path here. We can then extract some information. So in this case, using the message info extractor. So we extract the order quantity, limit price, and the instrument in this case. And then all of those outputs can then be used to build out our further logic downstream. In this case, we have a bid, we have the minimum price increment, and the logic here was to capture that order, the existing order, capture the information, and then have the price modified so that it requotes 5 ticks below the market. Okay, so the order comes in, captures some information, and then that order is housed in the single order container block. And then using the inputs on that particular block, in this case price, we are able to have that order continuously requote 5 ticks below the market. Okay, so just going back to the workspace, if I were to zoom in a bit here, if I were to place an order down here at 7816, there's two ways to go about applying this algo logic. So I can center click, I can select OMA, and then I will see that under my algos, I have that OMA 5 ticks under the best bid. And I can then, if I have additional user-defined values, I could modify them here. And then I click Launch Algo, and we'll see that that order is now 5 ticks below the best bid. So best bid at 30, we are at 25 in this case. Now, going to the order book, it's worth mentioning. We do see two lines in this case. We do have a little tree icon indicating that there is a child order for this particular, let's get that a little wider there, for this particular OMA 5 ticks under bid algo. So the algo line on top, child order on the bottom, and it will continue to requote accordingly. Now, if I were to cancel that order and cancel this algo, I could also place another order, and then from the order book, I could select a particular order. I can click on OMA, and I can then see my OMA 5 ticks under bid as well. I can select algo, and again, just applying the order in the same way, and that order will then requote based on the logic in the algo, which in this case, again, is 5 ticks below the market. Now, if you are applying some kind of a logic that is going to, let's say, just stay at a single price in a very slow market, think about short-term interest rates a number of years ago, an OMA can be applied to that order, and it doesn't actually take action unless you want it to. In this case, we certainly are taking action. We are requoting that order to 5 ticks below the market. But if it is just to place a cover order for 1 tick higher, it can certainly do that, but it wouldn't lose place in queue, which was a major benefit of this functionality. So again, just to note, if you are looking to create an OMA algo, the key is just to bring in that existing order block and then capture the information and store it in that single order container. I would also note that in order to build and test this type of algo, it's kind of difficult to test in the sense that you need to apply it. So you build the logic, and if you press play, you can press play, but nothing's going to happen because there is no order. You would then have to deploy it, apply it to an order, and that gets a bit cumbersome because you have to deploy and it takes a bit of time. So what you can also do is, let's go ahead and cut that existing order block. And I'm going to grab an instrument, I'm going to grab a price block, and a discrete order block, and a generator block. So what we're going to do is we're just going to generate an order to save us some time in testing. So for the price, user defined, we're going to generate on every start, feed that into there. So using a discrete order block in this case, because this will generate an add OK message, and we'll have that, it will generate that, that order just like we would when we are applying the logic. And I can, let's get a product going here, CL Jan 24. There we go. And I'm going to need an account set as well. Now for our price, get a valid price here, 78.19. Okay. 78.19. We have our instrument. We are good to go here. We are going to need to reference both a price and a quantity for our discrete order block. So at the bottom of the block properties on the right side, we do have formulas, edit, and for the price, I'm going to reference the price block that I just added, and for the quantity of 1, and save. So now from here, again, this is just to simulate this being applied to an order without having to deploy it. If I just hit play, I'm able to capture that information, or simulate the capture of that information that would happen when this logic is applied to an algo. So we can see the order quantity, the limit price, and that order is then stored in that single order container. If that order were to be filled, you could then continue on with the demultiplexer and, let's say, an order block in order to generate a sell order, in order to generate some kind of cover logic that would then give you any downstream activities that you want to have your OMA conduct. So if we just did a value extractor, we could actually, just going to copy that. this case, we'll use the fills, and so we'll do a fill price, we'll do a fill quantity, this will be our price block, and this will be our quantity block. Okay. So in the event that order gets filled, we would then capture that information and then quote accordingly. Obviously, given what we talked about earlier in the webinar, you would likely want to group and virtualize this depending on the quantity that you are quoting. But from here, if we were to play, we could launch all of the initial order side, and then if that were to get filled, we can then have that quote order, cover order, quote at the best offer. In this case, 78.29, 78.29. Actually, I think I took the, actually I just took the fill price on that one. That was kind of an error. It should have been plus 1 tick. But nevertheless, we can build all that downstream logic, which is the point, and then test accordingly without having to deploy. So that is it for webinar 2. As I mentioned, we do have a team distribution email, training-ux@tradingtechnologies.com. So if there are any questions, again, ADL related, autospreader related, just how to use the platform in general, feel free to reach out to us. We can always take your questions, hopefully answer them, and if not, we will try and get the answer for you. Take care, everyone. Thank you for joining, and hope to see you soon.